long officially were you here for?
I came here in early 2004 and was here until early 2015.
Okay, so about 11 years.
That's going to be 11 years, yeah.
So over the course of the time you were here, the two things that we're going to focus on with me is the way how technology has changed over 70 years. Obviously, you don't know about all 70 years, but just in the 11 years that you were here, I think technology changed a little bit more, not only in terms of the way we can present it, but also just the technology that the ways we get the data have also changed, and also just memorable storms that you remember when you were here.
Right.
So that'll be, and then anything else you kind of want to say.
Okay.
So those are the two main topics, and then anything else.
Right, right.
So in terms of technology, how had that changed in the 11 years that you were here?
I think one of the things we've seen the most is the rapid transition to digital. You know, when I first started here, we were still doing analog television, and we transformed to digital while I was here. And that's kind of par for the course, as so much information was being transmitted digitally, not just television signals, but weather data. We started to have much better weather satellites go into orbit and become operational. We were able to get better resolution satellite imagery, not just in space, but in time, get images much more frequently at different waves in the electromagnetic spectrum. So what does that mean? We can look at clouds in the infrared, in the ultraviolet. We can look at ozone. We can look at the straight up regular old visible satellite picture, the way the clouds would look to you if you were up in orbit. But being able to do that so often, so frequently, gives us a better and clearer picture of what the atmosphere is actually doing, so that we can prepare people a little bit better for the weather that is to come.
I think when I talked to Fergie on Saturday, I made the comment that, you know, the science of meteorology still isn't a perfect science. It's still not, you're not going to get it right 100% of the time, but it's a whole lot better than it was just in probably the last 11 years. It's gotten so much better.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I feel good about is the very short-term forecasts. You know, these 12, 24, 36-hour forecasts are exceedingly strong, right? The devil, though, as they say, is in the details. For any one individual who might live on one side of town versus the other side of town, somebody might live in Alta Vista or they might live in Amherst, they can still get very different weather, especially during the summer or during the dead of winter. We have not had a lot of winter storms, obviously, this year, but as you know, it's still very common for somebody in Lexington, heading up toward Nelson County as well, Livingston. They're going to get snow. Whereas Alta Vista, Amherst, and certainly farther south, South Boston, Halifax, they're getting rain. And pinpointing precisely where that transition occurs is still exceedingly difficult. So I think that's where some of the frontiers are in that very high precision forecasting, to then cascade into what the impacts are going to be for anybody living in a specific community across the heart of Virginia. Because I think that's really where the biggest issues are regarding winter weather. The other thing is still individual thunderstorms. Finding out exactly where a thunderstorm is going to pop up on a July or August afternoon is still very difficult. And I think that's also going to be one of the last frontiers of meteorology. Summers in Virginia and the Southeast, having a better understanding of where to pinpoint where a thunderstorm might develop. Because that's like bubbles kind of coming together on a pot of water. You turn the stove on, the bubbles start to form on the bottom of a pot of water, and then they rise as you get to the boiling temperature. And it's those little bubbles that we have to think about as the genesis area of thunderstorms. And that's hard. I mean, that's very, very small scale stuff. And even if all of our mathematics, even if all of our physics was perfect and great, we need to understand what the state of the atmosphere is initially, what's going on right now everywhere, before we can accurately forecast what's going to happen 12, 24, 36 hours from now or longer, all right? And we can't do that, at least not yet. I don't know any way that that's going to happen anytime in the near future. But as they say, there are people working on that, and that's called data assimilation, and trying to make the best mathematical representation of the atmosphere possible, so that then you can go forward and make your best guess on what the weather's going to do at any one place at any one time. I'd say the other good thing that's come along is our medium range forecasting is a lot better, 3 to 6 days out. It's still got a long way to go to reach the kind of precision of the first couple of days, but very, very rarely does a big storm legit just kind of surprise people. We're looking at what's coming up this weekend. A lot of the new numerical guidance suggests that we might have a wintry mix in Virginia on Sunday, all right? And we're doing this on a Wednesday, so that's 4 days out. The precise nature of exactly what that's going to be, still don't know yet. But there's something out there, there's something to be mindful of 3 to 4 days in advance. And I think that's one of the things I take forward in terms of understanding our risks, understanding our uncertainties, what to be expected in the weather in the coming several days.
When talking about just strictly the TV aspect of things, in the 11 years that you were here, changes that you saw in terms of getting that information to people, whether it be, the addition of new monitors, the addition of a new weather computer, or something along that line?
Yeah, the weather hardware, the weather software certainly got a lot stronger in that time. Computers have been getting stronger and faster, and once that happens, you can program them to do better things more quickly. So we were able to put together different ways to visualize the weather for the viewers. And of course, social media really started to blossom in that time while we were here. We were the first to take on Twitter here. I remember when the group of us were here, Twitter was just starting to become a thing. And I remember looking around at the Weather Center, I think it was Matt Ferguson at the time, Lindsay Tapassis at the time, and we're like, we need to seize this now. We need to be on Twitter now. And this is 2010, 2011, well before it's become the monster that it is today. Because in my mind, Twitter, in its best form, is a wonderful way to get quick information out to a large populace in its best form. Say what you want to say about what's happened to it recently. We can go down another whole rabbit hole there. But I think to get short bits of information out quickly, like big storm coming to Appomattox in 20 minutes, there's a lot of value in that, where you can reach somebody quickly. As smartphones became widespread in acceptance while I was here between the late aughts and the early teens.
Storms, memorable ones. I know it's impossible for you to remember every single storm that you cover, but ones that really stick out to you over the last 11 years.
The snowstorms. We had several of them, and to pinpoint one versus another is a challenge, of course. But snowstorm coverage and what we do to prep for the storm, what we do to cover the storm in real time, and then to some extent the cleanup afterwards. But as I think you have done, I spent more than one night here at the television station because it was snowing so much. We just felt like, we wanted to be here until people went to bed at midnight, and we wanted to be here when people woke up at 5 or 5:30 the next morning, so they understood what's transpired overnight. This is what it looks like out there. And I might not have been clean shaven when I went on the air that morning, but I think most of the viewers kind of forgave us for that. But we wanted to be in the thick of it, so when people were waking up in the morning, they knew what had happened, what they should prepare for, and importantly, when was all this going to be done? I think those are the big things. The other thing I think about was shortly after I started here, and I can't remember the precise tropical storm, but we had a small tornado outbreak. I think in my first year here, my first fall here, and for the first time in my career, so I'm going to say this is about the fall of 2004. I got a call from a viewer, and I think in Appomattox, that said, the information you sent out saved my life. And that's when it really hits you that what you do is important. Some days it's more important than others, but when it's really bad and the weather can kill you, you want to get the most accurate information out there as timely as possible to protect people and protect property. I mean, that's kind of why we do this.
Okay. Memorable moments that were here that maybe they don't have anything to do with weather, but just, memorable times that you had here. I know a lot of the other people that we've talked to, they've said, they've met. I interviewed Cropper yesterday.
Yeah.
Cropper told me that he proposed to his wife on the picnic table on the roof. I didn't even know there was a picnic table on the roof. You know, you had Fergie. He met Danner at the station he interviewed for in Lake Charles,
Right.
and then 2 years later ends up right here. A lot of people meet very good friends here and whatnot. On that kind of a realm, what does this place mean to you?
You know, one of the wild things about, or different things about being a meteorologist and a television station, you get a front row seat as to how the newsroom operates. Now, obviously, people are interested in the weather, and that's our jam, right? All the time. But sometimes there are epic news stories that have nothing to do with the weather. And as meteorologists, that's our time where we just quietly step back and observe. You know, and I remember very distinctly when Virginia Tech happened, being on the air, doing a weathercast live at the big old green screen. But at the time, the newsroom was very close by, and I could hear an audible gasp in the newsroom while I was on the air live once they realized how many people had been killed. Those are things you remember. You know, I remember when Falwell passed away. That's an epic moment in Lynchburg history. I remember being here and watching how people reacted to that. Those are things that you think about in terms of being a quasi eyewitness to history. But as you also mentioned, you make great lifelong friends in this business. Lynchburg's not a big city. A lot of people do come and go. But a lot of those connections, a lot of those people you meet who go on to other things, you keep those connections, and they make for wonderful reunions later on in your career. For example, you know, Bill Foy was a great mentor to me as a news director here for a while, and I can't say enough good things about Randy Smith. He actually hired me in Roanoke back in the 90s and then rehired me here in late 2003 and early 04. I likely would not have had this career without somebody like Randy, so I'm tremendously in debt to him.
Dan, you
I guess, let's see, we asked, I think Patty had asked some of the other people any memorable bloopers. That's one thing.
You know, there's always a couple of bloopers. Fortunately, I didn't have any massive gaffes that I can remember. I'm sure if somebody wants to go tooling through some videotape, they'll find some. But I don't remember anything especially horrible off the top of my head. I always try to keep it kind of even keel. Unlike you, Will, who likes to walk around in a balloon or something. That really wasn't my thing. But you know, look, there's value in that. Sure, for better or worse, people also kind of want to be entertained and informed. All right, you want to take them on a journey with you about what you know, what you understand about the atmosphere. So those are the kinds of things that I wanted to take on. One of the things I do miss a lot is going out to the elementary schools to talk to weather to the students. I mean, there's nothing like, you go to an elementary school, there are these 8, 9, 10-year-old kids. They're happy to see you. You do a couple of experiments. At the time, my kids were littler as well, so I could kind of relate to them and what they were going through. Do cheesy little science experiments, make them laugh, give them a stake in understanding science as a scientific process, not just the weather in and of itself. So those are the kinds of things that also stick with me.
When you were talking about bloopers, one of the things that it was one of my first live shots. It was one of those snowstorms that you were talking about. They had me out on the front yard. You were in the weather center. I forget what I couldn't hear in my IFB. The IFB dropped out. The call dropped. Something happened, and I couldn't hear you. At the exact, and I had one of the PAs was actually my photographer outside, and it was Sam Farnsworth. You remember Sam?
Oh yeah.
And I said, Sam, I can't hear anything. And Sam popped his head out from the camera. He's like, oh, I can't hear anything. I just walk out. He goes like, and I said, yeah, you're right, because I can't hear anything. Right around the time that I said I can't hear anything, that was right around the time that you were tossing to me. So the way it looked on TV was, let's go out to Will's.
Kind of like that.
Yeah. It said,
That was the best of us.
exactly.
You know, I checked the weather. It shouldn't be that bad today.
No, that's my call to wake up. I said the way it sounded on TV was, hey, let's go out to Will, who's live outside. Will, how's it going? I can't. and then it cut back to you, and your response was, well, obviously it's going well. Okay. And thankfully that tape is no longer can be found.
Yeah, those are just things that kind of, that's par for the course when you're doing live television anywhere. Sometimes things go wrong and you roll with it. It's always funny because you're trying to, when something like that happens, you have to make a split decision in live television. Do you address it? Do you laugh it off? Do you ignore it? How do you handle that? And it's a decision you make within less than a second. And within 5 seconds, you realize you either made the right decision or you regret it. Or you regret it.
What is something that people at home wouldn't realize about putting together a weathercast or putting together a forecast that you feel like, from a TV perspective, that you see the on-air but you don't see the behind the scenes? Talk about some of the work that you do that goes into that.
Yeah, in terms of putting together the weathercast, there are still some people that think we just walk in and do it, but there is a lot of prep. In a city as the size of Lynchburg or Roanoke or even a Richmond, you've got to prep all the weather graphics yourself. You have to put the foundation of the weather product together. In very large cities, you will have a producer to do that, but that is exceedingly rare, especially in this day and age. So you have to come into the station generally maybe 3 or 4 hours ahead of time, ahead of going on the air, to be sure that you understand what the weather is doing in every place that matters. You can put together a forecast in your own mind over the next 7 days or longer if you think there's going to be a bigger threat. You have to put together some graphics that are going to help you tell that story, and then you have to tell the story. And depending on what shift you're working, sometimes you tell it very, very often and very, very repeatedly. So there is certainly a lot to be done there. It's as much as I would have loved the idea of rolling out of bed and just doing it, it's just not that easy.
Yet. Well, actually, your new job, you kind of can. You just kind of roll out and go over to your home studio.
I have a home studio at my place in Richmond, Virginia. I work for the Richmond Times-Dispatch now. Our corporate parent is Lee Enterprises. We own 10 classical newspapers, what we like to call digital dailies across the state. So I'm in there doing weather videos for Richmond, Fredericksburg, and we're expanding that across the state. It's a build-out process right now, but it's very exciting. But to your point, Will, yes, when we had the snow just about a week or so ago, and to be fair, it was not as expected. I'm not going to sit here and pretend, oh, of course we saw the snow. No, we thought it was going to be 40 miles farther south. Fair. But I was able to get out of bed, and I don't have a very dark beard. I don't have a hair to comb. So I was able to walk out of bed, check the weather data, grab a cup of coffee, and instantly do a video update within 20 minutes of being awake. So, but that's because I knew what the weather situation was the day before, and it was just a small change, and I could go and do what we call a nowcast. I could look at the data quickly enough to realize, okay, this is what's happening in the next 6 hours, and this is what people care about in the next 6 hours. So talk to those points, but also tell them when it's going to be done. Yep, we know it moved a little farther north, but everything suggests now this is going to be done by 10 or 11, and it's all going to melt in the afternoon. So it's pretty, and enjoy it.
You were here when GMV was on at 5:30, right?
Yes.
When you started GMV, it was on at 5:30.
Yes.
And then eventually it moved over to 5.
Correct.
Okay. So one of the things that I asked Fergie, the only time he went on at 5:30 is when he filled in for you, and then when he took the job full time, it had already gone to 5 o'clock. What was it like going, because you did morning TV at the other place for several years, but they also started at 5:30, right?
Because I started in the market over, as they say, across the street at the local NBC affiliate, Channel 10. And I did weekends there for 2 years, and then did the morning show with Karen McNew, who is still working, I think, for Carillion. And we started the morning show at 6 back then in the late 90s. Then it backed up to 5:30 there as well. But again, if you've got to be prepped a couple of hours ahead of time, that means you're getting up at 2:30 or 3 in the morning, showering, shaving, getting a suit on, driving to the station, getting in touch with all the weather data, putting together a graphical presentation, and then sharing that with everybody repeatedly for morning television, because we know most people aren't sitting around for 2.5 hours watching a morning show. They kind of jump in for 20 or 30 minutes, and then they're off doing something else. So there is a lot of repetition in a morning newscast.
when it went from 5:30 to 5.
Yeah,
How big of an adjustment was that for your? Because I know the morning
Yeah.
show, it's all about routine and
It is,
you
it
gotta have a
is.
schedule, otherwise you get off it.
you just had to back your routine up about 15 or 20 minutes. That was really core of it. Like, wow, now I got to get up at 2:30 instead of 3. So that's where the big routine is. But you know, you get used to doing a little weather hit, as you will, every 10 or 15 minutes. And in between those times, especially as we got into the 20 teens, as social media became more of a thing, that's when you were able to address those types of things in that interim time. So it was a very, very, very period. It was a very busy period between the time you hit the air at 5 a.m. and by the time the show ended at 7 and we threw to national. That's when you're like, okay, breathe. Go get some coffee, go get some Pop-Tarts out of the vending machine, or whatever you need to do to catch your breath.
Because, stay awake.
Well, no, I didn't have any trouble staying awake. Once I was up and going, I'm going. The time when you start to have the drowsies wave over you is about 10 or 10:30 in the morning, where you've done the heavy lifting of the morning newscast and the cut-ins that we do for the network, and then you kind of have to recoup everything for what was then just the noon newscast. And there's not a lot of new information, fair or not, at a noon newscast. It's kind of just catch up and being sure all the I's are still dotted and the T's are still crossed leading up into the evening newscast. But sometimes the toughest part of the day in terms of being awake could sometimes be more like 10:30 or 11 in the morning.
Did you ask about viewers? I have a question. Can I ask it? Do you mind if I hide that?
Sure.
It's real quick.
No, it's
so
fine.
you had a very loyal following here. People like every word you said, that was something they lived and breathed on. Talk about the viewer connection that you had, what viewers would say to you when they saw you in the grocery store or wherever, and talk about how that sort of grew as your time here progressed.
Yeah, I love that. I love the relationship I had with the viewers. I think shortly before I left, we did a promo about that, about my family connections to this part of the state. You know, my grandparents have one set of grandparents from Campbell County, another set of grandparents from Halifax County. Even though I was born and raised in Richmond and live there now, I have huge family connections to this half of the state, which I cherish. And I was able to go back and find Civil War burial sites of some of my ancestors and visit these places and talk to family members, visit schools, and having those connections build and grow through time was very, very gratifying. No matter where I'm in Virginia, I feel like I'm home. It's very different, obviously. Richmond is very different than Halifax, which is very different than Manassas, and it's very different from the Chesapeake. But to me, it's all Virginia. It's just different shades of the same thing, a place that I love and love to connect with the people of.